Hello, I'm here today with my good friend and business partner, Cheri Battrick, and we're going to talk to you about different kinds of journals and what those journals might have in common with the kinds of memoirs that you might choose to write. So, Cheri and I both are veteran journal keepers. Uh, I happen to be a veteran journalist by trade or by pre-retirement trade, but Cheri is, she's always kept journals and she's done several memoirs and captured many of her life stories, both in the pages of her memoirs and in those journals that have yet to be culled for her stories. So Cheri, why don't we start? You're the master journal keeper, I would say. So why don't we start with, give us an idea of what your journals look like or have looked like over the years.
So I have to credit Mr. Robinson, my 7th grade teacher, for getting me started on journals. I had a little diary before that with a little key that you would lock up. And of course, my brother took scissors to the little band that would lock it. So then I never dared to write anything in it. That was before I was in 7th grade, though. And when I got to 7th grade, Mr. Robinson had us make journals. And so this is one of my very first journals that was done under his tutelage. It's got a picture on the front that I drew. I lived about 4 miles from the beach, so that's why the ocean is there. Of course, there weren't coconut trees on the banks of Southern California Pacific Ocean, but it's all in your mind. And as I got the journal made, the cover made, I titled it "My Thoughts and Inner Feelings," and then I just used the standard, recycled brown paper with blue lines to write in my journal. And I didn't realize when Mr. Robinson asked us to do that he was going to start a lifetime of journal writing for me. I think he probably knew, but I didn't know that. And he would give us time every day in class to write. And being that 7th grade is a really traumatic time sometimes for kids as they're going through major changes in their lives and in their physical appearance and everything. There's always the emotional ups and downs. And looking back now as an adult, I think maybe he was really wise in doing that, because it allowed us to express those feelings on paper each day, so that hopefully we could then get them off our chest and just be able to focus on learning during our school hours. But there was one day in particular that something terrible had happened at lunch. And I don't honestly know what it was, because the page that it describes what happened is missing from this journal, because it was all loose pages. But you can see on this one that I was pretty upset. And I remember writing this journal entry, and I literally took my pencil, my number 2 pencil in my hand. And instead of writing like this, I grabbed it like this. And I wrote, "I hate Claudia and Vicky." Now, that was kind of rough. But I will tell you that in that moment of grabbing the pencil like that and writing those words that were just seething in my soul, those emotions came out of me, and they came out in words, but not in verbal words. And the energy, the negative energy behind them came out, and it went from my body onto the page. And then you'll see that after I got that out, then my writing kind of went back to normal. And it was almost like this burst of negative energy was released, and then I was able to go on. So that I wanted to share with you, because I think that a lot of times we write journals, or we get in the throes of writing journals as though our posterity is going to read them someday. And so we want to make sure that every journal entry is going to paint the most beautiful picture of ourselves. And really, you can do that if you want, But the blessing of journal writing, one of the great blessings, is being able to explore those feelings you're having, and to do it even in the way that you write, even with the instruments that you write. And Mr. Robinson told us, you can change. You don't have to use a number 2 pencil. You can use a red pen if you're really, really mad. I've never done that, but I could. And so that was really fun. When I graduated from elementary school and went into high school, I got my first bound journal. This is it. And I was kind of a creative girl. And so I wanted to do my journal a little bit different than most people would. And so when I wrote in my journal, I would hold my journal on my lap, and I would put the front cover up against my stomach. And you can't really see that very well from this angle, but then I could write on the right-hand page. But then when I would hold my journal like this and I try to write on the left-hand page, then the book was falling off my lap and it was uncomfortable. So what I did was I wrote only on the right-hand pages, all the way through from front to back in my journal. And then when you get to the back of my journal, you'll see, let me get it open here, that I flipped the journal over and then I wrote on all the now right-hand pages, which had formerly been the left-hand pages, so that I could hold the journal on my lap comfortably and write to the end. So my journal goes from front to back, back to front, but you have to flip it upside down when you get to the end and write.
Cheri, you might have been the pioneer who realized that this was a cost-saving measure, and I have seen magazines do that in recent years. You read it through one way and then you flip it over and you can read it through the other way. So this was very innovative.
It was fun. Well, and I had a series of bound journals through my high school years. This is another one that I had, and this was actually given to me by a dear friend, and I started writing this one in 1984. This one I actually wrote standard, right page, left page. So I believe I had gone from writing on my lap and sitting in my beanbag chair to writing at my desk. So you could lay the book out and write. But that was kind of an interesting thing. As I got older, I went through a period of time. Now Anne has said I am an avid journal writer, and I am, but I will tell you I've had years when I don't write. And I've had long periods of time where I haven't written, where I literally have written in my journal, I need to come back and write about this story that happened in my life. And then I'll skip however many pages I think it's going to take me to write that. And then I start writing in the present. So now I've got these chunks of journal pages that all I know is that I was going to write this story, and I can't even remember the story now. And so I'm missing it, right? So I haven't been as good when I've been an adult. But I did at one point decide that I was feeling a little overwhelmed by this format. With an adult life, you don't often have time to write as much as you do when you're a youth. And so with the responsibilities I had, I went to shorter or to smaller version journals, and I made them for different purposes. And so I had them engraved on the front. This one is about home and family. This one is about impressions that I got about my life, things I should do. And so I would jump from one journal to another, depending on what I was writing about. But I wasn't even really that consistent with that. And it wasn't until I took a writing class. This was probably 7 years ago. So let's see, Anne, I'm 56 now. So I was 49. I was 49 years old, and I was taking a writing class from BYU, my alma mater, and I was doing it online, and it was a personal history class. And they started out the whole curriculum with, you had to go to a store and you had to figure out what kind of journal you wanted to write. And I thought, well, why am I worrying about journaling? Because this is a personal history class, but okay, whatever. So they suggested that we go to a place that had lots of journals to choose from, and that Barnes and Noble was a good choice. So I went to Barnes and Noble, and I looked at all the different, they had everything you could imagine. They had leather bound journals, and they had fabric covered journals, and they had binder journals, and they had just all different kinds of things. And I couldn't find what I wanted. And I had decided by that time that what I really needed in a journal was a couple of things. One was I needed to be able to add things into it. So I did not want a sewn bound journal. I wanted a loose leaf kind of a journal, and I wanted to be able to also write on my computer because, as you know, life gets more intense when you're an adult, and I could type much faster than I could write. So if I could type it and print it out and stick it in a binder, that was great. And then not likewise, if there was something that happened in my life in the newspaper, or somebody sent me a birth announcement or something that I wanted to include in my journal, I could just 3-hole punch it and stick it in there. So I finally found this binder, and I found actually a set of 3 of these at a thrift store, brand new. And I decided that this was how I was going to do it. And then I went looking for paper because, you know, I just didn't think white paper was going to be as heirloom quality as I wanted. And so I found this paper, and it's wonderful. I don't know if you can see that, but it's got little tiny threads of blue and red and tan that are woven into the, not woven, but they're actually pressed into the paper. So they kind of curve in different directions, and the texture is really awesome. So it's kind of like parchment, but not, and kind of like craft paper, but not. And I really love the feel of it. It's a smooth feel to it. And then I went looking for the font, and I decided to go with, I'm trying to think of what it's called now. It'll come to me. I went with this particular font, and I went looking for a font that would be like my own handwriting when I'm writing beautifully, not fast. And this was the closest I could find. And in order to accommodate it, to make it look like my handwriting, I ended up having to increase the font size to 26 point. Now, I will tell you that people have said to me, how many pages is your journal, your journal now, this one? And honestly, I will tell you that I have probably 1,600 pages written, but when you consider 26 points, that's not like, 1,600 pages of 12 point. So it looks a whole lot more like my handwriting. And I chose to print it in chocolate brown instead of black, because I thought chocolate brown on that paper would be beautiful. And so that's my journal. And one of the things that I love about it is that it inspires me to write. I get inspired thinking I get to write with that font. And I love how it looks on the screen of my, it's Kunstler script is the font, 26 point. And I love to, watch the words flow onto the page in that font. And so it makes it really an enjoyable experience to write. And I can sit in my recliner with my laptop, and I'm great. I'm doing great. So Anne, that's kind of my story, but what's your story about writing in journals? Because I'm sure you've got a good one.
Well, I don't know that I have a good one. And I didn't have a teacher like you did who inspired me to start a journal habit. Now, I remember my son going through classes and having to keep a journal. Of course, he complained about it a little bit, but I started journaling because I went through a lot of dysfunction as a child, and I ended up burying my emotions, and I would just end up seething. So I started, I think I was in high school, maybe junior, senior year, and I found a black, ugly book that I started keeping as a journal, and I would kind of confide in it. I will admit that when I was like 13, I got one of those pink ponytail plastic diary things for a gift that had the lock, and I would maybe write a few things in that as well. My journaling was mainly in my head. I was a daydreamer. So, but when I did start to journal, in high school, I realized, wow, I am getting my feelings put down on paper. And of course, when I went back and read it years later, I thought, oh my gosh, how embarrassing. It was, I had literally almost vomited on the page. So it sounded like verbal vomit, but it was very therapeutic at the time. And then when I became a Peace Corps volunteer right after I graduated from college, I kept a journal of those experiences and I drew on that journal for writing stories that I fed to the newspaper back home. And now I'm using those journals, and there are like 3 of them, and they were actually, the title was in Portuguese. Uh,
Oh,
Here is one of those journals. Like I said, I kept 3 of them. Diario,
oh,
1974. So that, and it has a lot of Portuguese words in it because I was trying to practice my Portuguese while I was journaling. So in most cases, I can remember what those words meant, even though it's been many, many years. So that's one of the journals I kept. And then after I came home, we went on a trip 3 years later back to Brazil. And at that time, I started keeping a travel journal. And anytime I go on a major trip or vacation, I would keep a travel journal. And here is one of those journals that was gifted to me by my sister-in-law at the time. And so travel journals. And as Cheri and I are going to be explaining in future videos, you can have as many autobiographies almost as you have types of journals. Some people keep gardening journals. My own father, when he was growing up in rural Kansas, he followed the example of every farmer he knew, and they kept a little journal in pencil of how many bales of hay they harvested off of that field, how many times the truck broke down and it had to be repaired. So, they're journals for work records. So journals can be very, very functional, as well as inspiring, and as well as places to confide in and get your emotions out on paper. Sometimes I've been so desperate to write something, either been so angry or so inspired, that I've grabbed the first thing I could find, and it may be just a loose leaf, might be just a spiral notebook that you had for a class or something. So those work. Here's another one of my Brazil diaries. And it's just, I think it may be the one that I went to Brazil with. So and the binding is falling out of it, but I have transcribed this journal to the computer, and I'm working with those transcriptions now for a memoir that I'm working on about those Brazil years. Another thing that I grab sometimes, I really like to work on legal pads. And I use legal pads a lot to take notes as a journalist doing reporting. Also spiral notebooks, they work for journals. And then I like the cutesy ones too. And I have to confess that as unfocused as I am sometimes, and as unorganized as I am sometimes, I may have 3 journals going at the same time, just like I have 3 or 4 or 5 books that I'm reading at the same time, and they're in various stages of completion. But I like these kinds of journals. I think I got these at Office Max, and just small little things that I can open in the morning. And sometimes I use them to journal prayer petitions or to journal inspirations I get while I'm reading scripture, or just kind of a journal of thinking and what inspires me. And speaking of inspiring, Cheri inspired me with her beautiful loose leaf binder. And this is something that it's a huge, I don't know, I guess this is a 3-inch binder, isn't it, Cheri?
Mhm.
Big binder. And I found this upholstery fabric, and I was trying to do some prototypes for some products we were getting ready to develop. And I liked this brocade fabric, so I bought some, and I covered this journal or this notebook, this binder, with this fabric. And here is my attempt at copying Cheri with my Peace Corps journals as transcriptions. But I think that
Awesome.
eventually
Love the font.
yeah, I think the font is Apple Chancery, which on an iMac is pretty much what we have for kind of a script. But I think I may ultimately use this to transcribe some of the more profound dreams that I've had. I get a lot of instruction in my dreams. So eventually I think this is going to contain my dreams. So
Awesome.
those are, that's kind of an overview of my journals, and I've got boxes of them. I mean, I've saved them from year to year. So, and thank goodness I did save them. As soon as I go through all of them and categorize the information in them, and you can do that with little sticky notes. You can, you know, like on these few pages, there's a dream. These few pages contain this information. You can kind of categorize the information in your journals according to subject. And then you can go back and depending on what memoir, what story you're working on, you can transcribe those in a different location to possibly put together for a book. So the sticky notes are great ways to go through. And as soon as I get all my journals sticky noted, transcribed, whatever information might be valuable in them to transcribe to begin with, I think I'm going to burn them because I don't want my son to read them when I'm gone. I got to censor them first. So that,
I had a friend who was telling me that she was going to take a big fat black permanent marker to her journals, and
oh
she was going to redact, cross through everything that she didn't want her children to read.
yeah,
So
journals. I like that.
yeah, I thought that was an interesting idea, but yeah. So have you, Anne, as you've been doing this, I'm assuming that and I've been having this experience myself recently, that you are, as you're cataloging it all and post-it noting things, that you're reading those journal entries.
Oh yes. Oh
And
yeah.
are you finding that things that you had forgotten about are there, and
Absolutely.
or maybe that they're there differently than your today's memory is remembering them? Because I'm finding that.
Well, I don't know about the fact that they're different, but I tell you what, it uh, is a wonderful process of reconnecting with myself. Oh, that's what I was feeling then. Man, I'd forgotten I was going through that. Gosh, no wonder I messed up.
Yeah, yeah, the aha moments definitely
Yeah,
come. Yeah.
yes. And it
I've
gives
been
you a good, all encompassing look back at the trajectory of your life and gives you a totally new, wonderful appreciation for it.
Yeah. I think you get to our age and you think back and think, have I really done anything with my life? And you go back and you read those early journal entries, and even, the ones in the middle of your journaling experience, and the progress that
Oh,
you can see in yourself is just like, I have grown. Okay, maybe I'm not wealthy yet. Maybe I don't have the mansion on the hill. Maybe I, don't have 500 grandchildren and greats, but look at what I've changed. Look at how I've changed.
yeah. Yeah, it is amazing. So I would recommend that if you're going to connect with your life stories, um, definitely keep journals, keep them over the years, and then go back through them and see how much you've accomplished. how much you've grown.
I started going through one of mine. I got to a point in my life where I was having such intense spiritual experiences that I felt like I needed a separate journal for that. So I had my day-to-day journal, and then I had my big, my spiritual journal. And I have been looking for the last 2 weeks to try to find a particular journal entry in a particular year of my life that relates to an experience I had that I'm now trying to write a short story about. And I haven't found it yet, but every time I pick up that binder and I go to the next piece, I can't just skim it. I find myself diving in and wanting to read this entry or that entry, or, oh, what did I have to say about that? And there's just so much that we learn, throughout our lives. And boy, we can really go back and refresh our memories on some of those things that we've learned and forgot that we learned.
Yeah. Not only that, I think you could relive the
Yeah.
experience and really savor it. Maybe even more than when you first experienced it. So, oh.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this has been fun. I think it may be eye-opening for some people, especially people who don't keep journals. Maybe you don't feel like you want to embarrass yourself by journaling when you may not be a writer, but it's just like a prayer is between you and God. A journal is between you and the page. So there should be no shame, no embarrassment, no hesitancy. I think it's just a valuable practice. So I encourage everybody to do that.
Well, and as you were saying at the outset, you can take those journals. So now I can take those spiritual journals and I can draw on those to write my spiritual memoir. I can take my everyday journals and write about, the day-to-day life. And then, I've got journals from when I was employed that I could go back if I wanted to and write a professional autobiography. But you're not limited in the number of journals. You're not limited in the number of memoirs. And so maybe, you should think in terms of, rather than a linear memoir that traps all of your life from the beginning to the end or to where you are now, maybe you should just think in terms of what aspect of your life do you most want to preserve, and start there. Start with that.
And what aspects of your life have the most teaching value for others?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
Totally agree. All right. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this, and hope you have a great rest of your day. And if you have any questions for either of us, you can send questions or comments to personalchapters@gmail.com. Thank you.
And go to Barnes and Noble or someplace and get it.
Oh, yes.
Pick one out that you love.
And it doesn't have to be Barnes and Noble. It can be any kind. I have the most fabulous journal that I'm working on now that cost me, what was this, Cheri, at Walmart?
Oh, I think it was like, what, $5 maybe?
Yeah, $5 or $6. Gratitude journal. It's kind of a cross between a journal and a planner, and I think I'm lost without it anymore. So I really like that, and I'm definitely going to keep these from year to year as I fill them out, because I'm going to be amazed at all the stuff that we were doing. So okay, well, I'm going to stop the recording, and unless you have anything else to say, Cheri, do you?
The only thing I can think is pick a pen that you love.
Yeah, the writing.
If you're going to write by hand.
Mm-hmm.
And try several different ones out until you can find one that you really love.
Cheri.
Oh, you've got your quill.
Cheri did part of her journal for her memoir in a binder, I believe it was, with this quill pen.
Yep.
We can't find anymore. So
I wrote until it ran out of ink, but it wrote a good 40-50 pages. I was really glad.
So if you're like Cheri and I, and you have a real strong sense of tactile, a need for the tactile impression, then a writing instrument is almost as important as the paper and the ink So, and the binder. So good point. Good point.
Yep.
All right. Okay.